floor is yours, Ryan.
Super. Welcome, everybody. We're thrilled to have you and be able to talk a little bit about some great techniques on how to optimize reimbursements, especially those around personal use assets and particularly around vehicle personal use. Thrilled to have my partner here, Aaron, to present to us. Aaron, coming from SAP, how does SAP view this space? And would you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, of course. I'm going to start with the latter there. So I'm Erin. As you can see here, strategic account executive with SAP Concur. I've been with Concur for about 4.5 years now. So I've been around the block a few times, but we view our partnership with Modus as one of our key partnerships. So they are, Modus operates as one of our, and Ryan, if you want to go ahead and switch to that next slide there, one of our endorsed app partners, actually. So they are the most certified. They've got the premium certification. They know exactly what they're doing. And quite honestly, they do it even better than we do. So that is why we do end up working with them. And I will let Ryan tell you more about exactly what that looks like and which travelers and road warriors this might pertain to in your particular respective industries and businesses.
And that's a great place to start off. Thanks so much, Aaron. Is what we're really talking about is what we refer to as the mobile workforce. And when you're looking at the workforce, a lot of people say, oh yeah, I know what that is, but there's really some differences that we wanted to be super clear on. A mobile workforce is somebody who travels as part of their daily job. So they typically live within their territory. They're leaving their home and traveling from customer site to customer site in order to service or sell or visit with their customers. Their job is driving from location to location. That's very different than a traveling workforce. The traveling workforce is where you typically get up, drive to the airport, fly somewhere. And one of the big differences between mobile and traveling is with a mobile person, lunch, for example, that's on you. You're driving around your city, pack your lunch, bring it with you kind of thing. If you're traveling, those kinds of things all hit your expense report. And as the minute you leave your house, you start incurring those expenses. And both of those are completely different than the remote workforce that since the pandemic is a bigger and bigger piece of the workforce. These are people who they aren't in the office, but they're not traveling from customer site to customer site on a daily basis. And they're not traveling on a frequent basis. They're just working outside of the office. So they're not incurring mileage charges. But they are using their personal assets, like Aaron and myself working from our homes today. We've allocated space in our homes. We've allocated bandwidth from our broadband. We use our cell phones on a regular basis to communicate with work and access work systems. We wanted to make it really clear. There are these 3 types of workers out there, each of them completely valid, each of them using assets and resources from Modus and from Concur. What we're going to focus on today is just the left-hand side here of the mobile workforce. Inside of your territory, leaving home, going around your territory, providing for yourself while you're doing that, and then returning to your home at the end of the day. So let's take a look at who those people are. Typically in the industry, they're called frontline staff. And these are folks who even during the pandemic, a lot of them were identified as being critical workforce because they have to go to the customer site in order to work on things and address things. A lot of times the stuff that they work on can't be done remotely. And a great example is like merchandising. You just have to go to the grocery store or the convenience store. You have to be there in front of the shelves to get the work done. But think more broadly about how many roles do that. If there's scientific or medical equipment, if it needs to be calibrated, tuned, or repaired, you can't just box it up and ship it back. You have to bring the technician to the work site. Or in the upper right-hand side here, heavy equipment. You can't take your International Harvester tractor and ship it back to the factory to get work done on it. They've got to come to you to get that done. So from crop insurance adjusters to forestry to plants and manufacturing to construction to home healthcare, all of these roles, this mobile workforce remains this relevant and essential part of today's workforce. So we're really looking at what does it mean to support them and what are they bringing to their jobs. So we're focusing on the personal assets that they use in their job every day. And that includes the most obvious one is the car, that if they're driving their own vehicle around and incurring those miles. But it also includes things like, what about their home use, their broadband use? What about their technology devices like cell phone or computer that they're using for their job on a daily basis? And then you have the other things like maybe even a company provided device or the temporary assignment type compensation and those types of things. All of these elements come to bear to help support this mobile workforce. And one of the key things that we're focusing on here today is going to be the vehicle, primarily because the vehicle is the most common and it's the one that incurs the highest cost on an annualized basis when you're looking at all of these cost factors. So to look at that, one of the things that we wanted to use is from the Forrester Group, which is a advisory firm, very much like Gartner Group or IDC. Forrester's right there in that big three. They use a model called total economic impact. And total economic impact is a structure that allows you to weigh all of the criteria related to how you approach a problem in business and be able to gauge, as the name would imply, what is the total economic factors that you would get with one choice versus another. And the reason I like this structure is it takes flexibility and benefits and cost and mixes those all together against certain risk factors to give you that impact. A lot of times when you're looking just at cost, you miss out on those flexibility and benefit things that are the plus side of investing in these types of solutions. And by only focusing on cost, you don't always focus on the risks. The easiest one that procurement is so good at catching for us is that even though it might be cheaper, is that a company that you can really base your business on over the next 4 years? And that, of course, is one of the great reasons why Concur has become and SAP has become the powerhouse in the industry that it has, is to support our traveling, remote, and mobile workers. They're a company that you can really rely on, and that the solutions are there and it works, so that risk is very, very low. So using this as our orientation, flexibility, benefits, and costs divided by risk, equaling your total economic impact. Let's walk through some of this, talking about your mobile workforce and specifically the use of their personal vehicles to support their role as a mobile worker for your companies. So
keeping in mind,
yeah,
keeping in mind as we're discussing that, Ryan, this is something again that Modus is the expert at, and you're, the market leader in this, and that's why we partnered together. This is something that integrates seamlessly into Concur. So when you're thinking of this and you might be a Concur client right now or prospective client, consider this as something that is going to be integrated with and part of your Concur platform when we look at the big picture of the total economic impact here.
Awesome. And I hate to bring this up, Aaron, but if they're not using Concur, our product also works standalone as well. So yes. Just wanted to make that clear also. So going through the total economic impact, let's start first on the flexibility aspect. Now, of course, when you're looking at vehicles, typically, especially with these higher mileage drivers, you have a choice. You can either create you can give them a vehicle with company car kind of thing, or you can provide a reimbursement for them using their personal vehicle. Now, of course, when you're looking at flexibility, you can imagine there's a really big difference between those two approaches. If you're trying to provide a company car for the employer, you don't have much ability to react to market and business changes, especially as fast as within the quarter. Typically, you're leasing those vehicles on a multi-year basis. you're making commitments. And we saw through the pandemic how many companies had those fleet vehicles just parked and just sitting in the parking lot. Many times what we heard from people incurring vandalism and theft and things like that because they didn't have that flexibility. They had those cars. Now there's certain plus sides. When you have those cards, if somebody's car breaks for the day, you're like, take one off the lot and keep doing your job. You know, you have that kind of plus side. But it is something to look at is how fast can you react to changing market conditions? We talked about the cost of idle or underused assets. And what is your ability to really scale up or scale down quickly as your business changes? We've learned a lot in the past 4 years. You know, we got very comfortable with just assets always being available, supply chain always being there. And, you know, things are not totally back to what we remember from 6 or 7 years ago. So as you're looking at it from an employer perspective, really understanding how can you be able to adapt to the conditions that your company wants to change or is being forced to change by market conditions, and what does that give you? But there's another side that I really wanted to highlight, and one of the things that we find interesting is the employees are more and more wanting to exert their choice and their preferences in the workplace. A great example of that is the rise of Apple products at work. When I was younger, if you were at work, you were using a Windows PC, and there was like no question. Maybe you were using Unix if you were a real beanie spinner, but if you were a business person, you were using a PC. And now so much in the workplace is being driven by consumer choice for using different kinds of platforms like an Apple computer. And we put this stat up there from QuickBase survey that happened just last year, where 80% of the people who responded said that it's a factor in choosing which job is, do they have that ability to choose? Now, a great example of this is I was talking to one of our coworkers here, and she was grousing a little bit about the company car that her husband had because it was a four-door sedan, and they just had a baby. And you know, they would love to have an SUV or something higher. And I totally relate to this because I can't tell you how many times I completely knocked my head trying to get a baby seat into the back seat of a sedan. And just getting a higher vehicle that made it easier to shove that baby bucket in saved my noggin quite a bit of lumps. And so having that flexibility really for the employee is starting to become a factor on where they want to work. So, but there are downsides of that as well. Auto availability and the supply chain issues we talked about for the employer, those exist as well for employees. And it might be a hard time to say, hey, we're giving you a stipend versus giving you a car. Not every employee with that stipend can go out and get the car they need to perform their job. But it does allow you to align to each employee's unique needs. And in the interviews that I've done, I've talked to people who are like, this is what I get from my company. I add this much to it because I want to drive that kind of car. And that's what makes me feel awesome every day when I turn that key, is I feel great about my employer because they enable me to have that vehicle. And I know other people who are saying, I use my stipend, but I drive a more economical vehicle. It gets me to do my job the way I need to do it. But I don't care about cars. It's not something that I value. So I actually get a benefit the other direction. And just being able to align to that is part of that flexibility. You're enabling the flexibility of the employee, but you're also giving the flexibility of the range of employees who are going to find that value from the assistance that the company is providing. So let's shift over to looking at the benefits piece. And the benefits has this.
Before I move on, Ryan, I wanted to add a conversation that we're seeing all the time and having with clients that really ties into this is the client attraction. How are you attracting your employees? How are you retaining your employees? And I think everything you're talking about here with flexibility is pivotal to that as well. So this isn't just, you know, this is not a fleeting thing. This has been a theme for a couple of years now, and it is becoming more and more of a topic than it has been even in the past, excuse me. So definitely very, very relevant.
Awesome. Thanks for that insight.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the benefits and that same, you know, for the employer and the employee, For the employer, here we go. Of course, one of the biggest things is that it gives you the ability to optimize cost. And one of the things that we really need to look at is how much is the company putting towards this? Not just in the cost of the actual reimbursement or the vehicle, but it's all of the things that go around it, the insurances, the administration, the support staff, the everything that you have to put around this kind of stuff. You have compliance, which is becoming a bigger piece of the puzzle. You have states like California who have enacted laws and are supporting tort towards companies and their requirement to reimburse people for personal use assets. That's going to other geographies as well. There's about 7 states right now who are looking at really creating a law to enforce that employees have to be reimbursed in certain ways. We talked about the operational efficiency that goes around the optimizing costs, but I love what Aaron just taught us a few seconds ago there around one of the benefits is your ability to attract and retain the resources that you're looking for, and really presenting a better package or a company that cares more about its employees and their personal needs than others, and giving you that edge in the marketplace. And then, of course, with the amount of funds and the impact that this has on the morale of the workforce, keeping the insights and accounting around this and making sure that you really understand what the true costs are related to all of this and are able to react appropriately to it. Now, for the employees, as we talked about, one of the big benefits is they get to exert some of their preference. They get to say, this is how I like to do it, or this is how I want to receive it. It's kind of the corporate love language, you know, is this fits my needs better. Personalized, we talked about the car seat thing. And it is today still fairly differentiated. And you can see in companies' websites, those who put together flexible benefit programs can really lean into that and talk about how that makes them a different kind of employer and help attract the right employees. One of the key things, though, that I wanted to focus on is these last 2 bullets. Employees are smart as heck, and they are so good at comparison shopping and understanding all of the choices that exist in the marketplace. And one of the things about doing these programs is you need something that's substantiated and fair and equitable from the employee. Employees can be trusted to understand the information and see that there's some hard math behind the decisions that are being made, and that this is the best choice for that balance of the company and the employee. And when you're looking at trying to put together these types of solutions, you do want to add in the benefit sphere that employees will view it as a benefit of, this seems logical to me, this seems fair to me, and they're more accepting of those kinds of solutions. Anything you want to add there, Aaron?
Honestly, I think you did a great job covering all of these topics. And this is again, so relevant to the conversations we're also having with clients and speaking about their employees and being the employer. This is very important.
Awesome.
It's very top of mind for the many.
Great. All right, so when we're looking at cost, one of the things that you're looking at here is you've got 2 axes that you really want to compare. One is the number of employees who are driving, and then you also have the annual miles that are driven by employees. Now, the IRS has set up that there's a magical line out there at 5,000 miles per year. And at that 5,000 miles per year, the IRS has created an alternative to just doing the cent per mile reimbursement model that we're all familiar with. Today, it's at 65.5 cents per mile. And when you have people driving at that, their cost is completely linear. The more you drive, the more you get reimbursed. And that's given rise to some unfortunate things like we've heard from some of the people that we've interviewed. If you can't sell, drive, you know, those kinds of approaches where for them, that reimbursement becomes a really key part of their living wage. And if they're short, they have the ability to drive more to be able to rack up more miles and get that. The IRS at that 5,000 mile mark has introduced something called fixed and variable rate reimbursements. And that gives the company the ability to level that line a little bit. Now, it's really interesting is that when you're looking at it, between 5,000 and about 12,000, maybe 15,000 miles, depending on the class of vehicle, favor would actually allow you to give somebody a higher benefit than what that CPM reimbursement would do. And it would still be tax free, just like a cent per mile reimbursement is. This has a huge impact on what Aaron was sharing with us about your ability to attract and retain a certain type of mobile worker. Is if you can give them something that's above what that reimbursement on a cent per mile basis would be, that's a real motivator and that's a real driving force. But for your total road warriors, those people who are driving 20, 30,000 miles a year, even more, favor and the fixed and variable rate favor reimbursement allows you to save substantial dollars against a CPM reimbursement. But going back to the other point that we brought up on the benefits slide, it's substantiated. There's hard math behind it. It's something that your employees can buy into and understand. And it allows you to actually save. We've seen companies save millions of dollars off of their annual spend by moving to these kinds of programs. So when you're looking at cost, there's more options available out in the marketplace than what you would think. In fact, when you look at vehicle reimbursement, it's really not just one thing. We've only talked about fixed and variable rates versus cent per mile, but you also have accountable programs and allowances. Each one of them has pros and cons that allow you to either attract and retain, or to be fair and equitable. And many of them provide that merger of both of them. There's tax-free options in all of these, or tax advantaged options as well. So the value is really quite high across this. And by investing in it, if you're a company that has a number of your employees who drive, or employees who drive quite a few miles on an annual basis, there are levers that you can pull that bring more of the controls back to the company and allow you to still provide really great benefits to those employees. Going a little bit deeper on this, you always have to remember that mileage programs directly impact employees. And for certain employees, the mileage reimbursement is part of their living wage and can be part of the calculation to achieve minimum wage. So especially if you have folks who are paid lower on the scale as far as their salary or hourly, you might need to really pay super close attention to the mileage reimbursement to get compliant with the rules around the labor laws around minimum wage. But there's a couple of key things that you need to keep in mind. A lot of these programs drive GPS mileage capture, and that means you're either putting in your source and destination and it's telling you what the distance is, or you're actually tracking how people drive so that if they run into traffic or there's a detour, you're compensating them for the extra driving that they're doing, even if there might have been a shorter route available. The other thing is we're relying on the fact that all of these employees, especially the mobile workforce, they are mobile enabled. All of them have a cell phone. All of them are pretty savvy with technology and being able to use these kinds of things. And you need that channel to be able to communicate with them directly, both to get their documentation and all of that in place so that you are confident in their ability to represent your company well on the road, but also it allows you to deliver training and be reactive with them. One of the key things we hear all the time from drivers is they say, if you're going to force me to do this, make it as easy as possible, and really reducing that friction for them. And that's a key element, is anytime you're involving your workforce with a requirement, the company has to do its part to make sure you're choosing the best technologies and the best solutions so that that requirement has the least amount of friction associated with it. And then the last piece is, for any of you who are leaders, you know that you've just got to live by this, which is trust but verify. And how do you make sure that you're running approval workflows and getting all that documentation in place, so you have at least two sets of eyes on everything before you distribute funds?
And
Aaron, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think there should definitely be added emphasis to the trust but verify piece of things. It is so easy to even back when I was on the road for work, I would guess my mileage. I would forget to set my odometer. I wouldn't know what I was doing. I'm like, I don't know. I drove 50 miles today. I don't know. And I was trusted. It wasn't verified. I probably got paid more than I should have. In the end,
Yeah,
if there had been proper documentation or even the mechanisms for proper documentation, it wouldn't have been happening in that way. So just to reiterate, it's so easy, even if it's not on purpose, even if it's just error, or I felt like mine was just being a little lazy, if that's what it is, it can still happen. So important to make sure that you are doing your due diligence as employers as well to get those records and make sure that you have verification on everything you're having your employees process for you.
that is an awesome segue, because when we're looking at the impact of this, we can actually quantify it in a pretty big way. And it is so easy with mileage reimbursement programs to say, just submit your miles. But when you put it into context and say the difference, and this is statistical data, is from both Concur and from Modus, we are showing very clearly that you can save 10 to 20% on the amount of reimbursement simply by having a GPS tracked or GPS calculated mileage versus a self-reported mileage. And this really isn't to say we chose the word ignorance on purpose, is we don't think there's malicious intent here. But when you look at it and say, well, how far is the airport from my house? You're like, nah, I think it's about, because it takes me an hour and a half to get there and whatever. But when you track the actual mileage, it's always less, because we're not good at calculating the difference between traffic versus distance being traveled. You do have that abuse scenario. And this whole idea, I wish this was just something that I made up myself, but this whole idea of if you can't sell, drive, I can't tell you how many times I hear that when I visit with customers and drivers. And the issue that this is you do have those few individuals who will take advantage of a system if the system allows them to take advantage of it. You've got the verification piece, and this is a really key element. Is you have to realize that those two axes that we showed, where one is the amount that people are driving, but the other one is how many people are driving, because both represent a risk to your company. When they're out there on the road during working hours, I know that I was in a fender bender a couple of years ago, and my insurance company, the first question they asked was, this happened during daytime hours on a weekday, were you driving for work? And it was interesting, as they came back to that question multiple times, trying to really identify who was going to be liable for the damages. And so understanding that your folks who are out there driving for you, do they have the right kind of insurance, the right level of insurance? Do they have active insurance? Are they a safe driver? Do they have valid driver's licenses? Those things change. They change so much. And we've heard stories from so many of our customers who say that we did check the insurance, in January, like we do every single year. But somebody got in an accident in February and they had let their insurance lapse just in those 30 days. And now people are coming after the company to get reimbursed for that. And the cost there can be thousands to millions. And this is real data that I think it was in 2022, maybe it was 21. The data showed that for a non-injury accident, the average cost can be as high as $70,000 per incident when you put all the corporate costs involved. And if there's a death involved, it can be 10 times that and even more. So there's real concern here. When we say it's thousands to millions, that's actually being reported to us from the insurance companies and companies involved in regulating this area of the mobile workforce. And then the last thing is the diligence. And are you just doing enough? Have you put a program in place that would allow you to stand up in court and say, we've done everything we could to provide safe drivers on the roads of America? And are we really protecting our interests? And that, again, any kind of litigation, that's the word I was looking for. Any kind of litigation will, of course, drive cost at a very fast pace. But there are ways to reduce the impact of vehicle reimbursement and really directly impact cost, again, in a substantiated and a fair and equitable way. And these will have a pretty big impact, double-digit impact. The first is putting in a commute policy. And this is something that's really prevalent in all of the IRS revenue procedures, is that when an employee is driving away from their home and returning back to their home, you have the ability to flag a commute policy, which just says, look, on average, our employees commute this distance. Or you can actually calculate by employee, your distance from your home to the office is this much. And it's fair for us to expect that you, if you were working in the office, you would drive that every day without reimbursement. So you can enact a commute policy that says every time you leave your home and return back home, we're going to deduct the commute distance from each of those from your day. And that can save you 15 to 25% on your reimbursement. And this is something that can be put in place. We have about 50% of our customers choose to use a commute policy as a way to reduce the amount of reimbursement that they're outlying in a way that is substantiated, intuitive, and fair and equitable. The other thing that you can do is that the IRS rates, the CPM rate is of course based on a 4-year depreciation cycle, but favor allows you to set your depreciation cycle. And you can choose to depreciate and say, I want all of my people driving cars that are no more than 2 years old. Or you can say, I will allow you to drive a car that's up to 7 years old. And by changing that depreciation schedule, you can have a pretty material impact on the reimbursement rate and how you're reimbursing people for the type of vehicle that they're driving. So it's you have these controls that are both very easy to explain to employees, that have a direct and material impact on the reimbursement that you're doing, and can save you quite a bit on your program. But there are some things that we've learned that you want to be super careful of. The biggest piece is that perception of inequality. And one of the things that we really see the most successful programs doing is that they make the program apply to everybody across the boards. And they aren't seeing that, you know, salespeople get to drive the best cars and nobody else gets anything like that, or the executives are just raking it in and nobody. When you put some of these programs in place, it gives you the ability to really draw a hard line and create a balance out there that is hard to achieve without this kind of substantiated data driving the program. But on the other side of that, one of the things that we also see that causes programs to really struggle to get the adoption is there's always that claim of people saying, well, I don't want the company tracking where I drive, and I don't want the company knowing what I'm doing. And it's, you know, at the end of the day, if you're doing like we talked earlier, if you're focusing on providing the most low friction solution possible, if you're trying to create an environment that's pro-employee and gives the employees the most flexibility and the most freedom and the most benefit, the company has the ability to say, but you're on the job. And if you're on the job, we need to know what you're doing and where you're going and how you're doing that, in order, because you're representing our company. You know, you might not be at the client site, but you're still representing our company while you're going to and from or between locations. So this whole claim of I'm too busy to fill out an expense report, or I'm too busy to tell you where I was driving, or I don't want you looking over my shoulder. Those are things that it's so funny, especially in the day and age of TikTok and social media and those kinds of things, where people are so willing to give away certain kinds of information. This is a big area that we have seen create a lot of challenges for programs and prevent the company from really getting the benefits that they're looking for. And at the end of the day, we almost always find that it's a vocal minority that's really pushing against something. And if you tie it back to some of our other slides and concepts that we talked about, there's usually a reason that people are concerned about this, and really standing up strong against it really brings the best benefit. But tying that all together to this very last one is under communicating. Is your employees, I can't tell you how impressed I am with everybody that I'm able to talk to out in the field. And these mobile workers are just great people and really well intentioned. And if they're given the information, it's been really remarkable for me to be able to answer questions for them. And they're like, oh, that makes so much sense. I'm so glad I know, because now I feel so much better about the program. So really keeping that communication honest, high integrity, completely transparent, and high frequency really makes a difference in getting folks bought into and working with these kinds of programs.
And to speak to your earlier point, Ryan, of the I'm too busy argument, the whole point of something like this is to make it easier for them. So just understanding, and the under communicating point that ties into that as well, the more you can show them and tell them, hey, look how easy it actually is, the less you're probably going to deal with those objections in the long run.
Awesome point. Awesome point. I hate to be a downer, but I do want to come back to that risk factor, because as we look at this, risk is one of those things where the number of people that you have driving for you escalates the amount of risk that you're going to get much faster than the annual miles driven. And it is something that we see becoming more and more prevalent in how companies are looking at this. You really need to think of how you're going to mitigate this. And I'm talking about risk with the hard risks of driver safety, but I'm also now introducing the soft risk, which is your ESG initiatives, or the environmental, social, and governance initiatives that your company is undertaking and reporting on. Talking about driver safety, there's 3 things that you really need to do. Just if you have people driving for you, you've got to think about this. The first one is checking motor vehicle records and making sure that people have valid licenses, that you know if they have been convicted of certain things that would indicate that you need to be cautious about having them representing you out on the roadways. The second one is doing that same thing for their insurance. Before you let somebody take a trip for your company, you need to know that if something happened while they were out there, that they have the right insurances in place to ensure that that's going to be taken care of appropriately. The last one we talked a little bit about is putting in a training program that gives you the due diligence to be able to show that the company is doing everything they can to support their workers as drivers and as citizens on the roads. So all 3 of these things are key. Of course, the more of it that you do, the more mitigation you have against those kinds of risks of have people on the road. At minimum, though, knowing that somebody has is legally able to drive, that their motor vehicle record is sound, and that they have insurance, those 2 things need to be checked just to be sure that they are covered, and you're protecting your employees and protecting the company in those areas. The softer side, though, is these emissions. And many of you are aware that in this last year, many corporate credit reporting agencies have started using ESG programs as a factor in credit reporting. So these programs are becoming more and more prevalent. And when you have a lot of your employees who are out there driving, they're producing a lot of emissions. And with the consultants that we've worked with, there's broad agreement that the emissions of people, even if they're driving their personal cars, because it is their job that's compelling them to drive these miles, this is what's considered scope 2 emissions, meaning the company is accountable to reporting on and improving on these emissions as part of their ESG program. And of course, our products do provide you those ESG reports so that you can see the emissions of people covered by our programs, and providing the guidance on how to improve on that within the EPA guidelines. So in summary, there's 5 points on really how to look at where you are as far as managing and enabling your mobile workforce, and the types of things that we find common as we work with customers and people who are trying to improve their position with their mobile workforce. And the number one thing is, how long has your current program been in place? We talk to so many people that say, hey, we've been doing this for 10 years, 20 years. And in that time, we've had millennials become the prominent new workforce. We've gone through a pandemic. We've had remote working become the norm. The environment has really changed. If you're running a program that was successful for you before the pandemic, the question would be, is it really doing the same thing for you that it was back then? And looking at that. The second thing is, how much has your workforce changed? And really looking up, or looking very objectively at, what is the majority of your workforce looking for? Will admit, I am the outgoing breed. You know, my gray hair should indicate that I've been doing this for maybe too long, some people would argue, and that there are other folks that we really need to pay attention to. And one of the things that I always look at is, how do I make sure that the people who are coming into the business feel like the things that we are doing are great for them? I've been there for a long time. I need to focus on the people I'm trying to bring in to replace me instead of focusing on me. Number three, and really looking at what is the value proposition that your company really wants to represent? Being a company that people love to work for, being a company that people feel like is really looking out for them, it's becoming a bigger and bigger part of why employees choose to work for the companies that they do. And with as hard as skilled and talented resources are to find and to keep, this is becoming a really big piece of what we're seeing HR departments advise their department heads and leaders on, and really how companies are differentiating themselves in the marketplace. I know one of the reasons I love working for Modus, and why I really enjoy working with Concur, is because those are both companies that really pride themselves on doing things for their employees, and it is really great to work for these companies. Number four, really looking at those risks. People out on the road, it is just a crazy place. And I know that if anytime that you drive, anytime I drive, I am always just amazed at some of the craziness that I see happening. It's an interesting element when you have a percentage of your employee base that's what they face every day. And are you doing enough to protect them and protect yourself against that role that they have to play? And the last piece is, are you really getting everything that you need out of this? And are the controls of the cost and the controls of these programs in the hands of your employees? Are they in your hands? One of the key things about putting these in place, and we talked about the trust but verify and those kinds of things, that's all about putting the levers into control of the company and allowing the company to make the decisions about what works best for them and how they're going to make that balance between employee benefit and corporate benefit. The key thing that we're trying to do here is give you the control so that you can decide what kind of value you want and how you want to distribute that value between you and your employees. That's the key thing for number 5. Erin, how would you wrap this up, or what would you want to sprinkle on top of that?
I thought that was a great summary, honestly. Just keeping in mind that these are common themes, not only as it pertains to mileage, but honestly, as it pertains to the larger travel and expense picture as well. These themes are compliance. It is making sure that you have all the data that you need, making sure you're not wasting spend, attracting and retaining talent. These are all things that we talk about constantly. I know my clients these are very top of mind subjects. So if you're worried about those things or thinking about those things, considering how you could improve, Modus is a no-brainer and a step forward to that process and making it better.
Awesome, thank you. So that's the end of our slides. We've got a few minutes for Q&A. If anybody has anything they'd like to put into the chat, or Fernanda, how would you like folks to contribute?
Yeah, just using the Q&A box below. Please feel free to submit your questions.
We don't have any questions coming in. Is there anything that, Fernanda, as you were listening, anything come up that you would want to dig a little deeper on?
Yeah, if we could go back to the 5 things to look at.
Sure.
Which one would you say is the most important if we had to rank these? Is it number 1?
You know what? I think it's probably, from my mind, thinking about the marketplace that we're in today, it's number 3, is really trying to get the balance between, are you getting the value out of your programs for your employees and for your company? And really objectively looking at that to come up with an answer of, is it worth making a change now, or are we really getting everything that we wanted out of this?
Yeah, I completely agree with that perspective.
Yeah, and we
Thank you.
did have some questions pop in. The first one was, is there additional cost for implementing a favor program if you already use Concur? And yes, there is additional cost. Favor has a humongous data set behind it that allows you to create those fixed and variable rate reimbursements down to a regional level. And when I say regional, I don't mean like multi-state, I mean like multi-zip code region level, so that somebody who's driving in Chicago is getting a reimbursement that's appropriate for driving in Chicago versus somebody who's in rural Illinois or any of the farm country around it. And because of that specificity that allows Concur to be so specific to the specific conditions of that driver, the vehicle that they're in, the way that they, or the place that they drive, and making those costs exact, that access is where some of the additional cost comes in to make sure that you're providing something that is fair and equitable for each individual driver in your company. Aaron, maybe you could catch the next one on how Modus and Concur work together.
Sure. So Modus and Concur, as I kind of mentioned in the beginning, they are already integrated with one another. So when you are leveraging the Modus tools, it is automatically going to flow into the expense report of that end user. And then all they'll need to do is fill out maybe like a business purpose. It really does depend on the nuances of your specific business. But from there, it makes it, to Ryan's earlier point, the whole goal of this is to make it much easier for them to capture that data as an end user and have that flow into Concur, be a part of their report, and make sure that they're being reimbursed properly, all while you as an employer are advantaging from like the tax perspective and more accuracy and the visibility side of things. So hopefully that answered that question. Did I miss anything there, Ryan?
No, I think you got it. That's great.
Okay, perfect.
All right, so the next one is about other personal assets, and we did cover that at the very beginning of the presentation, but I appreciate the question. Is the personal assets that are covered by Modus programs today are, of course, the vehicles that we talked about, but it's also cell phone and tablet. It includes broadband, home office use, as well as living costs. And living costs are if you're doing temporary assignments, relocating, things like that, how to, having the substantiated data behind all of that. And all of those kinds of programs can be run with the substantiated benefits and at a very focused, where you're providing data that's very specific to either that city, that geography, where that person is doing their job. So that's a really great question as well. Next one that we've got is about tracking mileage, and do companies only use it for the vehicles like we talked about, like cent per mile or favor programs? And this is a really interesting element. I'm glad you brought this up because we didn't cover it at all. Is there's a lot of different ways that these kinds of technologies can be used to provide that visibility and transparency into the driver and what they're doing. So there are companies that we work with that just get the rates, but handle their own mileage reimbursement. And that works great for companies like pizza delivery companies or any kind of workforce where you have a very high turnover in your workers and they don't stick with the company very long, but you just want to be able to know that you're reimbursing them fairly for their local geography and not, overpaying some and underpaying others. There's also a huge element of, for companies that do provide a company vehicle, part of providing a company vehicle is you actually have the ability under the IRS tax code to charge your employees for what's called personal use of that vehicle. So if I provide you a company car, that's awesome for what you do day in and day out, but you have that car in the evenings and weekends as well. And if you're driving the heck out of that car on the evenings and weekends, that changes my depreciation level as an employer, and you're getting a greater benefit out of it. So even companies that do provide company cars are using these technologies to get substantiated personal use data for that chargeback to the employees, so that you're keeping that, again, very fair and equitable. That's one of the key elements. So there's a lot of different choices. You can just use the tracking technology, but not the approval workflows. You can mix and match a lot of this based on the specific needs of your business. And that's one of the things that I'm really proud of as being an employee of Modus, is that we are able to tailor our capabilities to the needs of each individual business. Each of the attendees at this conference and each that we talk to has their unique business requirements that they need help supporting. And we have that ability to be able to help them with their business, not force them into our models. The best way to get a quote for these implementation costs, Aaron, if they're a Concur customer, what do they do?
If you're a Concur customer, go ahead and reach out to your account executive and we'll put you directly in touch with your Modus rep. We'll help you out.
Awesome. And if you're not with Concur, we would love to hear from you directly at Modus. You can reach in with the off our website, the web forms, the telephone numbers. And Fernanda, do we have anything special coming out of this webinar that people would use to be able to get attention immediately?
Yeah, you will receive a follow-up email with a recording of the session, and you can reply to us back at marketing@modus.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Great. And Jessica asked another question around if you are manually entering mileage, and this goes back to that idea of, instead of saying, hey, I'm driving, it's 30 miles to the airport, if instead you're putting in your home address and the airport address, and then letting the GPS tracking or the GPS software tell you what that actual distance is. The great thing is that can be done if you're a Concur customer or a Modus customer, or if you're a customer of both. There are solutions available. Modus provides some back-end technologies to Concur, so that's part of that partnership there. But you have that ability in both kinds of solutions to be able to do the manually entered but GPS calculated mileage. And I think the last question for today that we've got is there a big difference between per mile and favor, and how have employees reacted to the change? And there is a big difference. I mean, favor uses favor uses a calculation that provides each employee a reimbursement that is specific to their geography. So again, as simple as if you're in Chicago versus being in a rural area, but also if you're in Delaware, which has super high personal vehicle taxes, versus if you're in Kansas, which has very low taxes. It compensates for all of those things to make sure your reimbursement is specific. The 65.5 cents per mile that is deemed by the IRS, and Modus also supports the IRS in calculating that rate. But that 65.5 cents is based on a national average of everybody everywhere put all into one big bucket. This is what it would be. But what that always means, at least what I learned when I took math class in school, was all an average means is that nobody's actually average. You're always over or under that number. And so the big difference there between favor and CPM is a national average based on a 4-year retention cycle of the average vehicle across the entire country. Favor is specific to that kind of vehicle that you deem is appropriate for that role, to that zip code, to the specific costs of depreciation, maintenance, taxes and fees, fuel, all related to that person and where they live and what you deem is important for that role. And so they are very big in their big differences in their approach. As far as being able to substantiate, CPM says the IRS gave us this number, we're just paying that number. Favor says your job has these requirements and you live here and it's specific to you. So there's so many differences, even though at certain points, the reimbursement might actually be really, really similar. How you came to that and how you communicate that and how it makes people feel good about what they're getting from the company, vastly different between the two programs.
Mhm.
All right, I think Fernanda, we've got everything that we wanted to accomplish today, and I don't see any more questions. So I think we're good to call it for now.
Yes, thank you both so much. And thank you to our audience for tuning in today.
Thanks for having me. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Aaron.